Hello.
Our story begins inside the Resolute as Anakin learns from Bo-Katan that the Mandalorians have been taken over by Darth Maul, his criminal organization, and Mandalorians loyal to the Darksaber. Anakin and Obi-Wan both felt terrible for them, but Mandalore wasn't a priority. They were fighting against the Separatists, and technically, the invasion of Mandalore would be declaring war on the system. These treaties had been in place for centuries, and if they were broken, it would force the Republic into yet another war. While Ahsoka was annoyed that Obi-Wan wanted to consult the Council, Bo tried to take a dig at Obi-Wan. The truth is, the Jedi weren't able to just do things because they wanted to. They worked in accordance with the Republic, and they had Republic men on the line. They couldn't just risk harming clone troopers in a battle that didn't pertain to the main conflict of the war. Though Kenobi made it clear, even through the shade he was getting from both Bo and Ahsoka, he would consult the Council and ask for their guidance on the matter. If permitted, he would do as the Council asked. During the same time, Ahsoka and Anakin caught up. Obviously not everything was just as it was, but Anakin had a surprise for her, where he showed her clones who had been with them since the Battle of Christophsis, wearing her colors on their armor. There was a short little moment before Obi-Wan informed them that the Council approved of the mission. Anakin was eager, but with ship's alarms blaring, he needed to think quickly. There wasn't time for arguing, so Anakin expressed that he would lead a detachment of the 501st to Mandalore. The rest of the division would go under Appa to Coruscant. Anakin would go with Ahsoka. Obi-Wan was at odds with this, especially since Coruscant was under attack and the Chancellor was captured, but Anakin was determined to follow his heart. Obi-Wan wouldn't try and argue with it. That just meant he needed to regroup with someone else on Coruscant but before trying to save the Chancellor. Luckily, there were a number of Jedi on Coruscant to choose from. Anakin told Ahsoka to go to one of the Venators in the fleet, and he would meet up with her there. He just needed to get everything in order before they departed for Mandalore together. Bo-Katan and her vessels would be using their hyperdrives, so Ahsoka took an LAAT with a bunch of men in it and regrouped in one of the other flagships. Anakin then designated Rex to follow along with him as Commander Rex. On the other hand, Commander Appa would be going back to Coruscant to help General Kenobi inside this current ship. Everything was set. Rex and Anakin were the last out of the vessel. As they were preparing to land, half the fleet jumped to hyperspace. There wasn't time to waste. When Anakin's vessel landed, the rest of the fleet jumped towards Mandalore. It wouldn't be until a few moments after he landed when he would realize that Ahsoka had gone to the wrong ship. She didn't know she went to the wrong ship either. She only noticed when Anakin wasn't in her ship and the ship jumped to hyperspace. That was a bit awkward, but there was nothing she could do about it. She would have to help out at Coruscant, but she wasn't thrilled about being here. Both Anakin and Obi-Wan's fleet would deploy at the same time. Anakin would join his men in the gunships as they descended onto Mandalore. The treaties had been broken by the Republic. Mandalorians and clone troopers fought side by side as their gunships sped down to the surface of the planet. The fighting was intense, but it didn't stop the clones from doing their jobs. Once Skywalker was able to get to the ground, he led his men on a frontal assault. While the clones were already a surprising force, the Mandalorians, despite Maul's plans, were not ready for Skywalker. Obviously for Bo and Anakin, there wasn't any connection, but they had to work together. A weird dynamic for sure, but Anakin's aggressive style would mesh well with Bo-Katan on the battlefront. The Mandalorians who fought back would be cut down by the clones and forced back down into the city, another plan by Maul. He had every intention of drawing this conflict out, and because he knew that Skywalker was here, he'd make the Republic wait out the day. Of course, any clones that came down to the sewers would be slain, but on the top side, he would allow the clones to feel security. His main goal was killing Skywalker, taking Sidious' prized pupil out from under him. It was the perfect revenge. The Republic and the Jedi would soon be destroyed. Sidious could have that, because it mutually benefited Maul. However, taking Skywalker would be so much more worth it for him. Anakin, Bo, and Rex set up a command center inside the palace, and they remained there as the fighting quieted down. Bo was surprised about this, and due to Anakin's headstrong nature, he showed a lot of impatience towards her for bringing them all the way out to Mandalore just for the Mandalorians to hide in the sewers. He wasn't stupid enough to chase the Mandalorians in the tunnels. That'd be a suicide mission. Instead, he insisted on smoking them out, with the little help of war crimes. Over Coruscant, Ahsoka used a basic model Jedi starfighter and provided covering fire for Obi-Wan and Mace Windu as they made their landing procedure on the Invisible Hand. Both Jedi Masters were quick on the infiltration. When they got to the Chancellor, they freed him and then they turned to fight Dooku, who was not expecting Windu. Dooku and Sidious were very confused, but Dooku was in for it now, and he engaged Mace, who was very determined to not make the same mistake he made the last time he was around Dooku, and then he pressed a harsh offensive, one that threw the Elder and weakened Dooku off balance. This didn't even give Dooku a chance to fight Kenobi. Mace did what he was supposed to do, defeat Count Dooku and take him as prisoner. With a new prisoner and the Chancellor, they prepared for their escape. This got them stuck in a ray shield. When they were brought to the bridge, Grievous scoffed at the idea of Dooku having been captured. He actually pitied him, but instead of releasing him from his shackles, he decided to kill Dooku. It was a move that shocked everyone in the room. But to Grievous, if the Jedi could capture Dooku, then he wasn't worth following anymore. It's not like Sidious would get captured or anything. The death of Dooku meant trouble for the Jedi. A couple months before, they learned that Dooku gifted them the clone army. Essentially, Darth Tyrannus made them an army and then started a war against them. The Council had been yearning to know why he had done such a thing, but with him now dead, it appeared that they could not get their answer. On another note, Windu and Kenobi needed to break free, so that's what they did. Mace Windu was out for blood, and despite the Chancellor being captured by 2 battle droids, he understood what was more important. Obi-Wan immediately got engaged with the Magna Guards as Windu hunted down Grievous alone. What would 2 brain-dead B-1s do to the Chancellor in the time it took for him to destroy the droid general? Nothing. Literally nothing. They'd pull him out of the room and look at each other confusedly. Windu didn't have time to play patty cake with them. He came around the corner and lunged at Grievous. He was quick to defend, only igniting 2 lightsabers. Typically, Mace could use the dark side to take on opponents who used the dark side, but Grievous was special. He didn't have an ability in the Force like Dooku. He was able to press a heavy attack against the Jedi Master of the Order. Windu gave a stiff resistance, but it almost proved to be not enough. Despite all the skill, it took a Master of Defense or Form 1 to best General Grievous. More aggressive duelists would struggle against Grievous, because their moves were easier for him to calculate. But on the brighter side of things, Grievous had been stalled by Windu long enough for Kenobi to get involved. The General had a window of opportunity to escape, but Mace wasn't going to play that game. Using the Force, he crushed Grievous's vertebrae, as he raised an electrostaff to try and throw out the window. Obi-Wan seized the moment and lunged forward, cutting Grievous down. The 2 Jedi were able to secure the bridge, the Chancellor, and land the Invisible Hand safely without incurring too much destruction, aside from a couple dozen people who were killed in the Air Traffic Control Center that was wiped out by the Dreadnought when it landed. As the 2 Jedi returned Palpatine to the Executive Building and returned to the Temple, Mandalore was left in silence. Night was beginning to fall on the planet, and there wasn't any signs of resistance. Rex and Anakin were planning out their strategies. They knew they were left in the open if they kept the heavy tanks on the walkways and paths. To fight against the Mandalorians would take the best of their skills as coordinators. On the bright side, they had help from the other Mandalorians. While in the sewers, Maul was assembling his warriors, the war wouldn't start yet. He was going to draw this out for as long as he could. The importance of defeating Skywalker could not be overstated. The Mandalorians were the least of his concern. Sure, owning Mandalore would be efficient, but it wouldn't be the beginning or the end of Crimson Dawn if it worked or not. He set his traps. The few clones who wandered down below the city were already facing their pain. Those who lived long enough to survive the first barrage spent the remainder of their lives being hunted down the sewers. It was a big reason why Skywalker refused to allow Captain Vong down into the sewers to begin with. There was no point. All the while, he was trying to get back into communication with Ahsoka, but she wasn't answering. While Skywalker may have been searching for her, after the Battle of Coruscant, she vanished. Obi-Wan tried to get her to come inside the temple, but because she knew the Jedi wouldn't offer her a ride to Mandalore, she knew it wouldn't be worth the time. The Council had their own decisions to make, and Ahsoka burdening them with Mandalore wouldn't help. The Siege of Mandalore, despite being a Republic-pushed assault, wasn't the most important thing right now. With both Grievous and Dooku dead, the war could come to an end, and the Jedi were expecting Palpatine to surrender control of his emergency powers. Initially, they were hoping he would do it the day after the Battle of Coruscant, but they figured he would need time to relax after such a strenuous situation. The Council had their suspicions about Palpatine, but if he was indeed just a regular man, then the stress of the day would force anyone to need time. The Jedi had their own deal with themselves. It was Palpatine had 24 hours to surrender his control of the emergency powers, or the Jedi would take control over the Republic. Despite Grievous and Dooku being destroyed, Grandmaster Yoda was being deployed to Kashyyyk, while Master Plo Koon finished up his assault on Caeda Nemodia, with Ki-Adi-Mundi on Megiddo, Stras Ali on Saleucami, and Depa Billaba on Kaller. The Council for the most part was separated, but they all agreed to the terms of taking control over the Senate. Most of the Council was happy that Skywalker wasn't here. The relationship between him and the Chancellor could have proven to work against them. In reality, if he was here, they likely would have had him spy on the Chancellor, but taking over the Senate seemed like a much more viable option, considering it was them doing it. In the case if Skywalker was here, they would have had to put trust in one of the least trustworthy Jedi in the Order. This plan would work in the favor of the Jedi. Sidious on the other side of the city had other plans. He knew exactly what he was doing. While Skywalker not being here was a pity, he would ensure his fall would be complete. All it took was forcing the Jedi to lose their patience. On the other hand, he had 2 different approaches for Ahsoka. Sidious knew that she was important, and because she had returned to the gutter, he could have her dealt with. On Mandalore, everything was slow. Anakin got some rest, but ended up speaking to Bo-Katan, who was still up. She was eager to free her people. Anakin and her had mutual contacts, or in other words, her sister and his master, but there wasn't really much of a connect for the 2 of them. Truthfully, she was itching to push Maul out, but because Anakin had no reason to assume anything would go badly, he believed it wouldn't be long before the Republic would move on out and the war would be over. During their walk, he received a message that he hadn't seen, but it was left for him a couple hours beforehand. It was Kenobi informing him of the situation and everything that happened. He skimmed over the whole taking over the Senate thing. That wasn't important, but he did express the Council's interest in the Senate, which didn't catch Anakin's attention at all. How could it when he learned that Dooku and Grievous were killed and destroyed, and the Republic was one step closer to victory? Obi-Wan also told him about Ahsoka going back into the lower levels, more or less him sugarcoating everything that happened, so it didn't seem as ominous as it really was. For Obi-Wan, it was about making sure everything seemed alright to Anakin. He accomplished that much. It would continue to be silent for the following day. The Republic was cleaning up on Mygeeto, Boz Pity, Cato Demodia, and a number of other key worlds. For Maul, he was beginning to worry if he missed the window of opportunity. But even if he did, then why hadn't the Republic fallen yet? He just needed his chance to strike at the right time. But at this point, the clone troopers had come to the conclusion that the war was over. They were going to win, and they would no longer have to fight. For the other Generation 1 clones in the division and across the galaxy, they did it. They survived all 3 years. However, that celebration would be cut short when Maul felt his time was right. On Coruscant, the Jedi were making their move. It had been 24 hours, so they sent a number of Jedi to the Chancellor's office to request that he remove emergency powers from his authority. So, he said he would. But he tricked the Jedi, because when he said he would in all actuality be turning everything against the Jedi. As the Jedi prepared to leave the executive building, a number of clone troopers came running up to them. It was Commander Fox. The 4 Jedi were taken aback as they asked what was going on. Fox told them that their orders were to take command of the Senate and forcibly remove every senator from their seats. He wanted to clarify if there was anything else that they needed to do. And they shook his head and told him to stand down, and Fox told him that under Directive 47, all senators and politicians of the Galactic Republic had been found guilty of failure to uphold their offices. If anyone stood in their way, they were committing treason against the Republic. They were to be removed so the Jedi could take complete control over the Republic. Was it luck that Palpatine put this in place, or was it brilliance? Didn't matter. Palpatine locked his doors and called out to Skywalker to tell him the Jedi were taking over. Anakin was able to take this message. He was inside of an ATTE with Rex and a couple of other men. Palpatine put on his best act as he yelled out in terror, hiding under his desk. It really was pathetic in his own opinion, but he needed to sell the desperate politician. He asked Anakin why this was happening. He didn't understand why the Jedi would do this. Was he a bad chancellor? Anakin tried to understand his clone troopers could be heard speaking over the door, demanding that he open up. Palpatine told Anakin that the Jedi sent the clones after him. He expressed that he heard the sound of blasting in the hallways. Palpatine turned towards the hologram, told Skywalker that he was their only hope. Every senator, including his friend, Senator Amidala, was in grave danger. Anakin's fury rose to its height. He couldn't believe it, but now it all made sense. It explained why Yoda was hiding information from the Republic. It explained why they were always so distrusting of Palpatine. They used him to get power so they could take power for themselves. The call with Palpatine ended as the doors blasted open, as he cried out for Anakin to help before he was picked up out from under the table and dragged out, before a clone trooper stomped on the communication device. Anakin looked over at Rex, whose eyes were nothing but disbelief. Anakin told his clone commander that he needed to get back to Coruscant immediately. He didn't want to leave the boys here, but he needed to do something. If he didn't, then he would fail the Republic. Rex understood as he told him that they would handle everything here. As Rex said the words, an explosion lifted the ATTE off of its feet as it toppled upwards and slammed backwards onto its back, crushing the gunner in the turret. Skywalker cut open a hole in the side of the tank and crawled out. The first clone who dropped out of the tank was shot in the head by a Mandalorian. They were coming. Skywalker responded, turning his attention to the approaching enemies as he blocked the shots. Though as the clones exited, he couldn't see Rex. Where had he gone? Anakin called out Rex's name, and he called back telling him he was trapped. The clones looked over their general, suggesting that he go get Rex. They would handle the Mandalorians. The Siege of Mandalore had begun again. Maul was in position, watching the battle begin. Bo-Katan jumped back into action, but she realized that the palace was quiet. She assumed the worst and learned that it was indeed the truth. Maul had taken back the palace. Anakin was able to get Rex out of the ATTE, but his leg was broken. When Anakin got Rex out of the burning tank, he was clipped in the shoulder. Rex toppled to the ground as Skywalker defended him, blocking shots from the approaching Mandalorians, which currently outnumbered them. Anakin was able to get Rex away and into cover with his hurt shoulder and his broken leg. Anakin spotted Gar Saxon leading the assault. He blocked more shots as clone reinforcements got into the fray. Anakin requested a medic for Rex as Captain Vong came behind Skywalker, informing him that Bo-Katan reported Darth Maul inside of the palace. Anakin turned his sights on the palace. He could feel the darkness. But the truth is, he didn't know if that was coming from him or from Maul. Anakin spun his lightsaber and moved in. Captain Vong followed closely behind. Anakin cut down Mandalorians with such power that bodies hit the ground with massive thuds. It could be heard over the sound of the cannons firing in the background. Anakin pressed towards Gar Saxon as he tried to fly away, looking for more reinforcements. Skywalker reached out with the Force and dragged him back to the ground before slamming his blade onto his Beskar armor. The force of the strike threw him from his feet, and Anakin found the soft spot in the armor and thrusted his blade through it. He continued forward and broke off from his men when the opportunity presented itself. He ran to the throne room in Satine's former palace. He looked at the man who killed his first mentor. Anakin smiled, spinning his lightsaber around in his hand. as he told Maul that he would enjoy this. The former Sith turned with a grin on his face, and he asked if it was him who ran away on Naboo before he gutted Qui-Gon Jinn inside the energy facility. Anakin's face tensed up, and Maul smiled, and prodded more. He asked if he understood how much of a tool he really was. His entire life building to something he would never understand. He would understand once it was too late, though. Anakin asked what that was supposed to mean, and Maul turned his back to Skywalker, smiling, speaking the words slowly but with a hint of madness in his tone. Always lurking in the shadows, deceiving the public eye. He was a master manipulator, and the Jedi and Skywalker were none the wiser to it. Anakin demanded to know what this could possibly mean, but Maul didn't care to elaborate. Anakin was smart enough to figure it out, right? As a Jedi, he should know these things. He should be able to sense it, but he and his order never would. Not until it was too late. This confused Anakin more because right now, he was at odds with the Jedi. How could this make sense? Maul smiled at Skywalker and told him that he would never understand. He was supposed to become the most powerful Sith the galaxy had ever seen, and he was here to take that away from his former master. All the rage that sat present within Skywalker dissipated for a moment. What did any of this mean? Maul launched himself at Anakin, and quickly he raised his blade to defend himself. Maul's attack landed perfectly, and Skywalker had to recoil, backing off and regathering his strength, defying his anger again. Maul taunted him more. He could see the pull between light and dark, and Maul told him that this pull only made him weaker. If it weren't for Kenobi on Naboo, he would have vanquished that darkness long ago. Incredible how short-sighted the Jedi and Skywalker were. Anakin threw himself forward and Maul laughed. He could tell immediately that Anakin was a heavy hitter, so he didn't allow those heavy strikes to land. He parried all the smaller and faster ones, but he reserved his own strength, their blades smashing against the others as Skywalker and Maul fought the battle of the ages. The throne room lit up with flashes of blue and red, as Maul was kicked backwards, his metallic boots sliding across the floor. He spun his lightsabers around, and using his own iteration of a Sith howl, launched himself at Skywalker again. The Jedi blocked and spun under Maul, kicking Maul forward. Anakin stood up, towering over the smaller opponent. As he dragged his blade up over his head, there was a moment of stillness, each duelist catching a second for themselves before respectively launching themselves forward. Anakin's strength and darkness shined in this moment. He parried a strike. His thoughts moved from anger at the Jedi and his anger at the war to his rage and pain over the loss of Qui-Gon still eating away at him 13 years after it happened. Maul could see it. Anakin's shoulders squared up and put all of his strength into every swing. It didn't matter how maneuverable Maul was. He was thrown back and he tried to block, he tried to hold his own, but he was blasted backwards. Anakin slammed his blade down on the blade and he fell back, and Skywalker grabbed Maul with his metallic arm, squeezing his shoulder into oblivion as he dragged his lightsaber through his body and pulled him closer and told him that this was for his first teacher. Anakin ripped the weapon out and spun around, Maul still alive, gasping for air as he watched the blue weapon slam down across his chest, dropping him to the ground. Anakin looked down and told the dead body that he was so wrong. He turned back and looked out. The Mandalorians were at it again, a full-blown civil war. Anakin looked at the skies as they were filled with Mandalorians primed for combat. The war had only just begun. As Skywalker looked on, he then thought about the fact that Coruscant was under siege. The Senate, his mentor, and his wife were all taken as captors by the Jedi. He looked back at the clones and radioed to Captain Vong, who was taking command, that he needed to leave. The clone captain told his general that everything would be under their control. Inside the executive building, chaos erupted. But not just there. It was happening outside, too. As reports came in that the Jedi had seized control of the Galactic Senate, people of the Republic began to protest. How could the Jedi think they could get away with this type of behavior? They mobilized their army against the Republic, and now they were taking over. The Jedi were trying to stop the clones, and many of the senators saw this, but for most of them, it didn't matter. The deed had been done. The Jedi had betrayed the Republic, and they were trying to take complete control, and now everything made sense. With Dooku gone, they needed some sort of power, and to get it back, they took control of the Galactic Republic. What made matters worse was the inhibitor chips inside the clones. When the people came to protest, the clones went out and defended the executive building. To make matters worse for the Jedi, they were ferrying temple guards to the executive building. There was a reason for this. The Jedi were relieving the clones of their duty and making the temple guards take up the new role. Of course, this didn't help, it just looked like the changing of the guards. Windu and Kenobi were trying to do some damage control as they tried to get the senators to understand they didn't ask for this and they were trying to free them. Despite temple guards removing clones from their posts, they weren't able to free any of the senators. Instead, they informed the senators of the situation. Considering the clones were acting so erratically, they needed to handle the situation cautiously as to not upset the clones. Palpatine and the other senators, namely ones from his caucus, were finally seeing why he despised the Jedi so much. Palpatine had everything he wanted, just the way he wanted it. The inhibitor chips could handle multiple orders at the same time, and so he decided to play with fire. He was the first one to be broken away by the Jedi. He was escorted by 2 temple guards to the backside of the facility, where he would be able to escape using his personal shuttle. However, that wouldn't be the case. One of the guards was Grand Inquisitor, and when the moment was right, he turned on his fellow Jedi and cut them down, completely blindsiding them in the process. Sidious smiled at Grand Inquisitor and told him to go to the works. His next instructions would follow soon. What would come next would forever change the face of the galaxy. Palpatine had some executive orders in his back pockets, things he was saving until the time was right. Grand Inquisitor vanished from his sight, and he turned on his communicator and started to whisper. A hologram popped up, and with the help of Grand Inquisitor and Masameda, the message was sent across the city. He informed everyone that it was Chancellor Palpatine. The Jedi had taken over, and they were using the clones against the senators. Some of the senators had already been executed for asking what was happening. He was able to escape, but he told them to be careful. The Jedi were coming for them. He ended the communication and reached out for Commander Fox, and he told him to execute Order 73. Commander Fox did as he was asked, and within seconds, the entire front line of protesters outside the executive building were gunned down. The Coruscant Guard deployed into the city. Every single citizen was now an enemy of the Republic. He continued relaying orders to every single clone commander across the galaxy, issuing out Order 66 so that the Jedi could fall. Despite the timing being a little off, members of the Jedi Order were still killed. Ki-Adi-Mundi, Depa Billaba, Plo Koon, Stas Ali, and a number of others. The Jedi inside the executive building panicked as they tried to stop the clones, but Sidious decided to make the playing field a little more exciting. Since the 212th was here with Cody, they were given Executive Order 66 and 91, execute all Jedi officers and execute all senators. The chaos erupted when they opened fire on the platforms. What made it even better was the Coruscant Guard and 212th having different orders, so they started to target each other. It was a free-for-all. The Jedi defended the senators, and they were killed. The senators were killed. Temple guards were killed. 212th troopers killed. Coruscant Guard killed. It was a massacre, and Sidious could feel the darkness radiating through the air as protesters were gunned down the streets. As the Temple guards reacted to the surprise, they tried escorting senators away, but the 212th spread out around the building. Sidious was safe, because Order 91 didn't apply to him. Only the senators. 92 was for representatives and 65 was for him. The chaos continued down the halls as echoes and screams filled his ears, and he smiled with pride. The Jedi were at loss. While there were 5 council members present, none of them were prepared. Obi-Wan was able to get an injured Padme away from the firefight, but she was clipped in the stomach by members of the 212th. The Coruscant Guard was cleared out extremely quickly, but it gave time for the Temple Guards to aid the surviving senators into the halls of the executive building. The loss of life was terrible, especially because all the hundreds of protesters that showed up to rally against the Jedi were slaughtered by the clones. Sidious took use of everything at his disposal, and he forced the Jedi into an unfavorable predicament. The only downside was the fact that the temple was given time to prepare, but members of the 7th Airborne, another group under Kenobi's control, attacked the temple. They were aided by a mix of other troopers inside the Republic military complex. Windu was able to inform them about what was happening, so the defenses were mobilized, and because of that they were able to hold off the clones. Inside the executive building, the Jedi and senators split up. Obi-Wan was one of the only separated from the main bulk, but he was with Padme. Despite how obvious it was, he didn't realize that she was pregnant, like everyone else, and luckily for her, if she wasn't, she'd be dead. Though there might be some complications in the near future for her. As Obi-Wan was taking care of her, the doors opened behind him. Sidious walked in. He wasn't wearing his Sith robes, but he was looking rather ominous. Obi-Wan got up and asked the Chancellor if he was alright. Palpatine didn't say a word. Instead, he shot lightning into Obi-Wan's face, launching him from his feet and into the wall. Smoke rolled off of Obi-Wan's face and his body. Sidious prepared to kill Padme, but he noticed something he hadn't before. She was with child. Well, that changes things, doesn't it? If Sidious didn't know, then surely Anakin was unaware as well. This gave him 2 choices, and Sidious liked the latter. Despite his plans going into action, he always needed to be 2 steps ahead of the curve. 2 royal guards followed Palpatine in, and he told them to take her to the works, instructing them to use the underground passages to avoid conflict with the clones. The royal guards got her up and walked her out of the room. Sidious forgot Kenobi was in the room, and then he turned to see him standing up. Sidious knew this wasn't worth the time of an actual engagement. He raised his fingers, and Kenobi was lifted off the ground, his feet kicking in the air, his throat tensing up. He couldn't breathe. Sidious looked at him, enjoying every single moment, just as Maul did when he killed Satine. While Sidious never knew of her closeness to Obi-Wan or how she died, it would be ironic for them to both die in such similar fashions. Sidious could feel the life slipping away from him as he watched it drain Obi-Wan's eyes. He was then launched headfirst into the desk, and Obi-Wan slipped out of the air, falling to the ground. Mace and Kit Fisto were here. Agan and Stacey were with the other senators, but they saw Obi-Wan's communication device activate. Kenobi knew how important Padme was to everything. Obi-Wan used all of his strength to tell Master Fisto that the royal guards captured Padme. He understood, and Mace told him to go. He turned and ran. Windu ignited his weapon and told Sidious this ended here. He saw all the evidence he needed. He would kill Darth Sidious. The Dark Lord had other thoughts on the matter. 2 sabers ignited and leapt forward. Windu used his skill to deter the attack, but Sidious was quick and very powerful. Every attempt he made was pushed back by Windu's attention and mastery. As their fight took place, Skywalker navigated the building. Despite the clones not targeting him, he was throwing them through walls and destroying their weapons. He was here for one person only, his wife. He would deal with the Jedi later, but truthfully, he was only seeing dead Jedi. The sound of lightsabers caught his attention. How or why there'd be a duel going on, he didn't know. As he rounded the corner, he saw why, and he was very confused. Both Sidious and Mace turned towards Anakin and then back towards each other. Skywalker tried to wrap his mind around everything, and then he realized that Palpatine was some sort of Sith Lord. He ignited his lightsaber, remembering what Maul said inside the building on Mandalore, and then he demanded to know what was happening. Sidious quickly told him that the Jedi were trying to take over. They forced the clones to execute all the Jedi and the senators, and that didn't make sense, did it? Mace turned back and told Anakin that he knew that wasn't true. Sidious expressed that they would. They definitely would. They did it. Mace turned to Skywalker and told him that whatever Fives had uncovered in Anakin's report was true. He didn't know how or what it was, but the clones all reacted to it. The name Fives caught Anakin's attention. First of all, he didn't believe the Council ever paid attention to those reports, but he didn't have time to actually think about it more because Sidious hissed. He told Skywalker that if he abandoned the path, he would only know suffering. He pleaded that Skywalker join him. As Sidious suggested this, his back was engulfed in pain as the Jedi Master emerged from the office. Sidious turned back, swinging his lightsaber, but Obi-Wan got out of the way. He slowly withered on the ground in front of the three Jedi. Obi-Wan turned to Mace and then to Skywalker. He said that Master Fisto was retrieving Senator Amidala from Palpatine's royal guard. Anakin asked what that meant, and Obi-Wan shrugged his shoulders. All he knew is that Palpatine was trying to capture her. Mace told the two of them to get back to the temple. The defenses were holding, but they needed to have help getting the retreat underway. The two Jedi nodded their heads, rushing through the halls of the executive building. As they got out of earshot from Mace Windu, Obi-Wan turned to Anakin and stopped him. He told the truth, expressing that Padme was pregnant. She was shot, but she was alright. Chances are they lost the child, but that child saved her life. He didn't know what Sidious wanted with her, but he assumed that had to be the case. Obi-Wan put his hand on Anakin's shoulder and told him the secret had always been safe with him. It would continue to be that way. Anakin thanked him, and they broke off. It was a lot to take in, but they had to go. With chaos unfolding across the city, on the steps of the temple, in the city streets, and everywhere, Mace knew he needed to shut down whatever command was turning the clones into these monsters. He ran into Palpatine's office and searched for everything he could. On the other hand, Kit Fisto was able to free Padme and get her to a safe exit so she could get to her apartment, simply because he was with her. The clones were still in the building, but they had turned their attention to civilians, mostly because they couldn't get to the temple guards, who had pretty much cut them all down. As Mace was siphoning through the files in hysterics, one of the temple guards ran in and told him that one of their unit's transponders was transmitting from across the city. Every temple guard had access to security codes that informed them where all their brothers and sisters were. It meant they could have every inch of the temple covered when they were guarding. Because the unit was about 500 strong, it was important to know where everyone was, and as it turned out, this particular Inquisitor didn't show off its transponder. Mace sent Anakin Skywalker and Stacey Tin over to the location, as soon as they were able to get all the surviving politicians to a safe position. Because Mace knew that Palpatine was a Sith Lord, it seemed as if the Sith had been destroyed. However, the real challenge would come when it came to defending the actions of the Order here today. With thousands of citizens dying in the streets, it was important to have a backup strategy. The Jedi would likely be ousted from Coruscant, but as long as they weren't hunted down, everything would be alright. At the same time, Obi-Wan and Anakin arrived at the temple to help the evacuation. It was mostly completed by this point, so there wasn't really much to worry about. They helped out as quickly as they could, and when they were finished preparing to get into the transports, Anakin told his master that he had to go and find Padme. If he didn't, he wouldn't be able to live with himself. Obi-Wan understood, and he told Anakin to go, and wished that the Force be with him. In the industrial sector, Stacey Tin and Anakin Skywalker confronted the Grand Inquisitor, a man who was so close to his triumph in the new Empire, before he was taken away. He stood little to no chance against the talented duelists of the High Council. He put up a hell of a fight before his life was taken from him, though. The two Jedi Masters descended into the lair to see if they could find the information. Inside the executive building, Windu had been discovered. He was defending himself, but he could no longer siphon through information. The temple guards had evacuated the senators and were currently trying to suppress the clones in the streets. The guard unit was extremely elite, and because of their staves, they were able to do double damage, though they weren't killing the clones. Moving arms and legs and deflecting shots? Absolutely. The clones were both pushing against civilians, but also running from the temple guards, which meant for Windu that he had to defend himself. Despite his power and skill, he had no interest in killing the clones. He had to leave Palpatine's office because he couldn't find the information. The information he wanted was now in the hands of Masters Tin and Kolar, who needed to make their voice heard to the clones. Ahsoka, who was currently in the streets, was defending the civilians from the clone attack. She didn't understand why it was happening, but she was under the same belief as everyone else. She thought this was something the Jedi did, but in reality it was actions made by the Chancellor. It would take so much for the Jedi to undo what had just been done and set into action. Luckily for Ahsoka, she didn't see the Jedi vessels vanishing into space, because if she did, she likely would have used her master's anger against the clones. When she saw the Temple Guard unit weaving through the street, she realized where the Jedi actually stood. Mace, Agan, Kit, and Stacey regrouped inside the Senate building, where they were able to gain control of a public broadcast system. The clones turned off their frequencies on planet, and they had no reason to believe Order 66 or even 73 had gone galaxy-wide. The public announcement went out with Order 150. It was something Sidious had in case the clones got too far out of his control. It essentially turned every single executive order off. So the clones, if they were working with 65, he could execute Order 150 to save himself. And so that's what the Jedi did here. The clones stopped in a confused state of loss. They knew what happened, but they didn't know why they did it. The state of the galaxy would be at complete loss. With the order gone from the planet, the 4 council members had to pick up the pieces. As it turned out, there was much more going on. Order 66 was galaxy-wide, and the Jedi had to cancel out those orders. The public had absolutely no trust in the Jedi, and the few people who would have stood by them were either dead or in labor, which is where Padme was. Thankfully, she survived, but one of the 2 children didn't. The boy named Luke was the one who made it. The other one would have been named Leia, who saved her mother's life. It was a tragic loss, but thankfully the process went by healthily for Padme, which for Anakin was a relief, even though he never had nightmares about anything bad happening. This was incredibly important for Anakin, and because Padme was safe, and they had their son, Anakin decided to lead the Order. If he had been appointed to the High Council, he would have felt responsibility to stay, but he wasn't. Instead, he joined Padme, when she was feeling better, inside the Senate building as a fallen Republic tried to piece everything back together. The Separatist Council tried to push for an offensive, but a hit squad of Republic commandos killed them off. Sidious sent Delta Squad to deal with them on Utapau because Anakin wasn't on Coruscant when everything went down. The Senate therefore made it illegal for the Jedi to be in Republic territory. Regardless of their involvement or not, the people of the Republic, especially not on Coruscant, didn't want them around anymore. However, this was a much better alternative to being hunted down. The Jedi had a number of planets to choose from that weren't inside Republic territory, though the Senate elected that the clone army should have their chips removed because they were too deadly with them in their heads. The process seemed really beneficial, but it was mostly just appeasing everyone. It was really difficult, especially as representatives from every planet had to fill in where there were missing senators. The entire process was bumpy, but Padme was elected to fill the role of Chancellor in the absence of Palpatine and Masameda. She ran it with dedication and patience. Anakin elected to stay away from politics and raise Luke from home. It was a hard thing. Thousands of people died the day Order 73 struck the clones, but the cost of their deaths would be a galaxy reunited. The Jedi, despite being ousted from Coruscant, would find their purpose. After losing hundreds of members during the Purge, they would realize what they'd been missing all along. Their new temple would be a place that for generations would inspire new Jedi to take up truer purposes in life, rather than being glorified politicians. It was a complete 180 for the Order. Ahsoka and Anakin would become much closer on Coruscant, as they'd open up an auto body and repair shop in the upper districts. They'd put all their talents to good use, and they would help others with their vehicles, and for the 2 of them, it'd bring them happiness. The years would pass by, and old rivalries would subside. The corporate structure would be ripped apart and forced into the system, rather than having the ability to control the system. Padme would win an election and become the long-term chancellor, and her work would be the pride of her life. For Luke, he got to grow up seeing his mother at work inside the Senate, and be inspired to follow in her footsteps. Of course, with a family like his, he'd have an advantage in politics. Learning the Force from Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Ahsoka will do that to you. But he would be the voice of a future generation, one free from the burdens of a war started by the now extinct Sith. And that, my friends, is our story. And special thanks to Galvin Gaming, Tristan, Darth Revan, Granddaddy Bane, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Weewoo670, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Azavaz, Darth Nox, Eternal Padawan, Malik, Jen Naguin, Sansa Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Calig, Youngly Slayer 66, Madman Studios, Anakin 003, Lord Draken, Fortress Legacy Star Wars, Erebus, Rex the Wolf, The Man with 3 First Names, Darksane46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing. For supporting the channel, smash the like button if you enjoyed this video. If you want to support me in other ways, go check out the Patreon. There are updates for the Sith Clone Wars, also little animations like you saw in this video. Anyways, talk about the story real quick. Main focus, first of all, is the battle on Mandalore. I think Maul would be a lot more cautious with that, try and draw Anakin into the sewers. When that doesn't work, because Anakin's not going to do that, he's going to spring a trap and try and kill him in an ATTE, which is what he tries to do, before engaging him. He's like literally hoping that Anakin dies inside of an explosion, and then he doesn't, so he has to fight him. For Palpatine, I wanted Palpatine's plans to be a little bit more, like, brilliant here. I wanted them to seem like they actually could succeed, and they almost did succeed. And so it's like this weird duality of Anakin being on Mandalore by himself without being involved, and how Palpatine could have won without him, and it just didn't go in his favor because of Anakin returning and, well, I guess Obi-Wan always ruining his plans. So anyways, I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.